The language of the trees. In a remote village nestled within the folds of a vast and ancient forest, there lived a people who understood the language of the trees. This was no mere superstition or poetic metaphor. It was a living, breathing reality passed down through generations. The village, called Elderwood, had thrived for centuries, hidden from the world by the deep woods that surrounded it. The villagers were known for their wisdom, their unusual serenity, and the way they seemed to be in tune with the natural world around them. Elderwood was an unusual place, even at first glance. The houses were built not just near the trees, but around them, with trunks serving as living pillars for homes and roofs entwined with branches. Gardens bloomed with flowers that grew wild in the forest, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the muted greens and browns of the wood. It was said that those who lived in Elderwood were never sick, never lost, and always knew exactly where they needed to be. Outsiders, those rare few who stumbled upon the village, spoke of an inexplicable calm that settled over them the moment they entered the village. The villagers attributed this peace to their connection with the trees. Long ago, when the world was younger, the first settlers of Elderwood discovered that the trees spoke in whispers that could only be heard by those who listened with their hearts. The language of the trees was not one of words, but of feelings, impressions, and the deep, resonant vibrations that echoed through the roots and into the earth. The story went that during a particularly harsh winter, when the settlers were close to starvation, a young woman named Ilawan wandered into the woods, desperate to find food. As she trudged through the snow, she collapsed under the weight of her despair, leaning against the ancient trunk of a towering oak. To her astonishment, she felt a gentle warmth spread through her. Despite the biting cold, she closed her eyes and suddenly, she could feel something, a presence, a consciousness as old as the earth itself. The oak whispered to her, not in words, but in a deep, comforting hum. It guided her to a hidden grove where wild berries grew in abundance, their vines thick and vibrant despite the season. Ilawan returned to the village with her arms full of sustenance, her heart full of wonder. She shared her experience, and soon others began to venture into the forest, learning to quiet their minds and open themselves to the language of the trees. Over time, the villagers became fluent in this silent speech, able to ask for guidance, protection, and even advice on matters of life and death. The trees, ancient and wise, shared their knowledge freely, and the villagers flourished.
As the years passed, the bond between the people of Elderwood and the forest deepened. The villagers knew which trees offered the sweetest sap, which leaves could be brewed into healing teas, and where to find the rarest herbs for their remedies. In return, they treated the forest with reverence, never taking more than they needed and always ensuring that the balance of life was maintained. But this harmonious existence was not without its challenges. The outside world, ever hungry for resources, began to encroach upon the forest. Rumors of the wealth hidden in Elderwood's woods, a wealth not of gold, but of ancient trees with wood so strong and beautiful that it was said to be worth more than any treasure, began to spread. Loggers, driven by greed and the promise of profit, started to invade the forest. The villagers tried to warn them, tried to explain that the trees were more than just wood and leaves, but the loggers laughed, dismissing their words as the ramblings of superstitious fools. They brought their axes and saws, cutting down trees that had stood for centuries, oblivious to the cries of pain that echoed through the earth and heard by all but the villagers. One day, as the loggers pushed deeper into the forest, they came upon a clearing that had long been protected by the villagers. At its center stood a tree unlike any other they had ever seen. It was enormous, its trunk so wide that it would have taken 10 men, hand in hand, to encircle it. Its bark was silver, shimmering in the dappled sunlight, and its leaves were a deep, vibrant green that seemed to pulse with life. The loggers, their greed overcoming their caution, decided that this tree would make them rich beyond their wildest dreams. As they prepared to cut it down, the villagers, led by the elder who was known simply as Greyfeather, arrived. Greyfeather, a man whose hair had turned white from age but whose eyes still gleamed with the sharpness of youth, pleaded with the loggers to stop. He told them of the tree's significance, how it was the heart of the forest, the source of the tree's wisdom, and the protector of the village. But the loggers, driven by their own desires, ignored his words and raised their axes. Just as the first blow was struck, a terrible sound filled the air. It was a deep, rumbling groan that seemed to come from the very ground beneath them. The trees shuddered, their leaves trembling as if in fear. The loggers hesitated, but then the earth beneath them began to quake. Roots, thick and gnarled, burst from the ground, wrapping around the legs of the loggers, pulling them down. The trees themselves seemed to come alive, their branches whipping through the air, their bark splitting open to reveal faces twisted in anger and pain.